Most new players are using the wrong paddle, and not because they're lazy or didn't research, it's because nobody has explained how to actually think about paddle selection when you're just starting out. If you've played 5 games or 50, you've probably heard terms like control, power, spin, thermoformed tossed around, but nobody breaks down what those really mean or how they affect your learning curve. And if you've caught yourself wondering, should I just buy what the pros use? You're not alone. But what works for Ben Johns or Annalie Waters probably won't help you build consistency right now. And that's not a knock, it's just reality. What this video will do is cut through the noise and show you how to choose a paddle that makes the game easier, not harder. We'll cover 3 core paddle types: control, all court, and power, and explain why most new players should avoid one of them. We'll dig into the specs like swing weight, twist weight, and core thickness, not just tech jargon, but in plain English, so you know what to look for and what to skip. I'll also walk through the most common beginner mistakes, how to avoid Amazon traps, and what makes certain paddles genuinely better for learning. You don't need a $250 pro frame to get started, but you do need to know what matters, what doesn't, and how to pick something that works with your game and not against it. So let's start with the basics, the 3 paddle types and how they shape your performance from the very first point. Every paddle you'll come across falls into one of 3 categories: control, power, or all court. These aren't marketing buzzwords. They shape how a paddle feels, how it reacts on contact, and what kind of game it rewards. Control paddles are the most forgiving. They typically use thicker 16mm cores, which gives you more dwell time, a larger sweet spot, and a softer, more muted feel. They're built to help you reset, drop, and dink, the slower, touch-based parts of the game that most new players struggle with. If you're learning to keep the ball in play and reduce errors, this is the type of paddle that makes the biggest difference early on. Power paddles go the opposite direction. They prioritize pace, firmer contact, faster rebound, and a heavier swing feel. You'll often see 14mm or thinner cores here, sometimes paired with stiffer frames or elongated shapes to boost speed and reach. But that power comes with a trade-off. You give up margin for error. If your timing or contact point is off, you'll find yourself missing long, popping balls up, or struggling to reset under pressure. All court paddles sit in the middle of control and power. They blend a bit of both worlds, usually with a hybrid shape somewhere between 14mm to 16mm, and swing weights that don't lean too far in either direction. If you've got some racket sport background and are picking things up quickly, an all-court paddle can offer a more balanced feel without rushing your development. Here's the problem. A lot of players unknowingly start with a power paddle. Maybe it felt exciting on a first swing, maybe a friend recommended it, or maybe it just looked expensive and advanced. But what feels good on day one often becomes a liability once the rallies slow down, the pressure ramps up, and you're forced to control tempo. That's when you realize the paddle isn't helping you get better, it's exposing your gaps. And that's why I always recommend starting with a paddle that helps you stay in control. Not one that tests your precision with every shot, but one that gives you the stability to build real consistency. Because in the early stages, power without control just leads to faster errors. Okay, so now that we've got a clear picture of the paddle categories, let's address something most buying guides get wrong. Not all beginners are the same. There's a huge difference between someone picking up a paddle for the first time and someone who played varsity tennis and is now learning pickleball. Both are technically beginners, but they need different tools. If you're just starting out, maybe you've played a few times or you're still figuring out how to keep score, you're likely in the 2.0 to 3.0 range on the USA Pickleball scale. And at that level, the priority is simple: keep the ball in play. You're not hitting with consistent depth or spin, your contact point changes swing to swing, and you're still learning how to reset or absorb pace. This is where a control paddle makes the game more playable. It gives you a larger sweet spot, more time on contact, and a better chance of making your shots land in bounds. If you're around the 3.0 to 3.5 range, maybe you're winning more points, aiming your shots, and even starting to play in rec ladders or leagues, so there's some room to experiment. That's where all court paddles come in. They let you play a more aggressive style without giving up the forgiveness you need. You might be trying spin, changing grips, or adding tungsten to fine-tune feel, but even here, the best paddles are the ones that keep your game clean and consistent and not flashy or chaotic. The mistake that most new players make is thinking a $250 paddle or a pro-endorsed model will make them better. But that's like learning to golf with tour blades. It punishes every mishit and slows down your learning curve. The better move is to start with something that helps you succeed with imperfect contact and real-world footwork. That's what actually builds confidence and skill. So don't think in terms of beginner paddles versus advanced paddles. Think in terms of what your game actually needs today and what kind of paddle will help you improve faster without making the game harder than it needs to be. Okay, so by now we've seen how paddle types and player fit go hand in hand. But the real difference between paddles and what most product pages completely fail to explain comes down to specs. Not marketing terms like power or feel, but actual measurable specs that affect how the paddle moves and performs in your hand. And while you don't need to memorize every number, understanding a few key ones can save you from buying the wrong thing. Static weight is the one everyone lists. It's the paddle's weight on a scale, usually somewhere between 7.6 to 8.4 ounces. But static weight alone doesn't tell you how the paddle plays. You need to look at how that weight is distributed. Swing weight is what really matters, and it measures how heavy the paddle feels during your swing. And it has a massive impact on timing, hand speed, and fatigue. Two paddles with the same static weight can feel totally different depending on their balance point and shape. A higher swing weight adds plow through and depth, but slows down your hands, especially noticeable in resets or fast hand battles. For new players, a swing weight between 105 to 115 gives you enough mass to keep the ball stable without wearing out your arm. Twist weight is another underrated metric. It measures how stable a paddle is when you miss the sweet spot, which you will, especially when starting out. A twist weight of 6.5 or higher makes those mishits feel more controlled. Lower twist weight paddles might feel faster, but they're also much less forgiving. Core thickness is closely tied to control. A 16mm core gives you more dwell time, a muted response, and a wider sweet spot, all of which make it easier to keep the ball in play. Thinner cores, think 14mm and below, deliver faster pop off the face, but come with a smaller margin for error. For beginners, that added dwell time from a thicker core is a better foundation. Paddle shape also matters. Standard and hybrid shapes are the best starting points in my opinion. They give you a larger sweet spot and more forgiveness. Elongated shapes offer reach and much higher spin potential, but come with higher swing weights and a bit less forgiveness, which can make resets and hand battles and the game just generally more difficult when you're still building feel. And while most product pages won't list it, balance point plays a subtle but important role. A paddle with more weight towards the head will feel heavier in the swing, even if it's light on the scale. One that's handle biased will feel quicker and more maneuverable. If a paddle feels sluggish or like it's lagging behind your hand, it's often a balance issue and not a static weight problem. The point isn't to obsess over every number, it's to understand how they translate into feel. A paddle that's well matched to your skill level and swing tendencies will make the game feel more natural and frankly fun. One that isn't will fight you on every shot. Now that you understand how specs shape performance, let's move to what's on the face of the paddle, literally. Surface materials and how they're layered directly affect feel, spin, and feedback. And while it's easy to get lost in the buzzwords carbon fiber, Kevlar, fiberglass, what matters most is how those materials behave on contact and how they're paired with the rest of the paddle. Raw carbon fiber, usually Toray T700, is the most common surface material in serious paddles today. It's naturally textured, which helps grab the ball and generate spin, and it holds up better than painted or sand-blasted textures, which can wear out fast. That's why you'll see it used in everything from high-end frames to budget-friendly models like the Vatic Pro Prism or 11624 Jelly Bean series. It gives you consistent grip and solid control without being overly springy. Fiberglass plays differently. It's bouncier with a quicker rebound off the face, which can feel good on fast volleys or punch shots. But it doesn't grip the ball as well, and it wears down much faster. Some paddles use fiberglass layers underneath carbon to blend touch and responsiveness, but when fiberglass is the main surface, you'll typically get more pop and less control, and I just recommend avoiding those. Kevlar or aramid fiber is used to soften feel. It reduces vibration and adds a plush quality to contact. Most brands don't use it alone. Instead, you'll see it layered with carbon to reduce harshness without making the paddle feel dead. Kevlar blends are growing more common because they strike a middle ground, a bit of spin, a bit of softness, and less arm fatigue. PET, another soft polymer, also shows up in some layups. It adds comfort and reduces sharp feedback, but it doesn't contribute much to spin. Like Kevlar, it's typically used for fine-tuning feel, but materials only tell part of the story. Layup, the order and layering of these materials makes a huge difference. Carbon, fiberglass, and carbon fiber, or CFC, and fiberglass, carbon fiber, or FCC, are common blends that change the balance between bounce and grip. Some brands use multiple carbon layers to maximize dwell and spin. Others use Kevlar or PET to mute the feel or create a softer touch. You won't always see the full layup listed, but you'll definitely feel it, especially in resets, dinks, and drives. What you should avoid is chasing materials in a vacuum. Just because a paddle says carbon fiber doesn't mean it plays well. What matters is how that surface material is integrated with the core and frame to shape the overall response. So up next, we'll go deeper, literally, into the core materials and internal structure that define how the paddle actually plays over time. The core material and internal construction shape how the paddle feels at contact and whether it gives you confidence or holds you back as you develop. The most common core is polypropylene honeycomb. It's been the standard for years because it balances weight, control, and durability. You'll see it in everything from budget paddles to top-tier pro builds. These come in cores typically in the 13, 14, and 16 millimeter thicknesses. Thinner cores play firmer and deliver more pop, but they reduce dwell time, shrink the sweet spot, and amplify your mistakes. Thicker 16 millimeter cores slow the ball down, increase control, and give you margin for error. And that's why they're almost always the better choice for beginners. Then there's foam core construction, still rare but growing very fast. These paddles use solid foam instead of honeycomb, and they feel very different, quieter, softer, and often more stable on off-center hits. Good examples include the Honolulu J2NF, J2FC Plus, and the Carbon True Foam Genesis. That said, not all foam cores are equal. Brands tweak density and stiffness to dial in feel and power, so one foam core paddle might feel plush and forgiving, while another feels crisp and punchy. You'll also see hybrid approaches like honeycomb cores with injected foam around the perimeter. This edge foam increases stability, enlarges sweet spot, and reduces some vibration. Some Gen 3 designs go further, but these innovations aren't obvious at a glance. But they do affect how the paddle plays when things get fast or off balance. For beginners, the key is simple. Start with a thicker polypropylene core or a well-balanced foam core paddle. Don't mess with thinner builds until your control is very dialed in. Power is easy to find later, but early on you want forgiveness, dwell time, and feel you can actually control. Alright, next let's talk about paddle shapes. First you have standard shapes that are roughly 16 inches long by 8 inches wide, and they're the most forgiving and offer the largest sweet spot. Hybrid shapes are slightly narrower and longer, giving you a touch more reach without a big penalty in forgiveness. Elongated paddles are typically 16.5 inches long by 7.5 inches wide, offering max reach and spin potential, but come with a smaller sweet spot and usually higher swing weight. If you're new, stick to standard or hybrid shapes. They're more stable, easier to control, and make learning the game a bit less chaotic. At this point, you've got a solid handle on what to look for in a new paddle, but just as important is knowing what to avoid. And the biggest mistake I see new players make, grabbing the cheapest paddle on Amazon and calling it a day. I get the appeal, it looks like a good deal, tons of reviews, flashy product pages, maybe even the word carbon somewhere in the title, but in most cases, these paddles are built in factories with no real experience in pickleball. They're made with cheap materials, painted fiberglass instead of real carbon fiber, thin cores or stiff layups, and minimal quality control. The result is a paddle that feels unpredictable, lacks touch, and does little to support your development. Sure, it might hit hard, but it also won't help you improve, and worse, it may actually make the game harder. And that's not just a gear snob's opinion. Compare one of those paddles to something like the Vatic Pro Prism Flash or the 11624 Jelly Bean series. Two very high quality and budget-friendly paddles featuring high quality carbon fiber, consistent layups, and well-balanced specs. Both retail for about the same price as a top-selling Amazon model, especially with code MPB, but the difference in playability is massive. You'll notice it the first time you try to reset at the kitchen or hit a controlled dink or a drive. And to be clear, I'm not saying you need to drop $250 on your first paddle. You don't. But if you're spending $100, spend it on something that supports your learning curve, like those other two. Think of it like running shoes. If the fit is off, every mile feels harder than it should. Same goes here. You want a paddle that gives you confidence, not one that sends the ball flying every time you take a swing or just mishit it. A lot of new players still fall in the same predictable traps. The first is chasing power. It's tempting to grab a paddle that hits hard because who doesn't like cracking a drive or slamming an overhead? But if you don't have the control to manage that power, it becomes your biggest liability. You'll pop up resets, struggle with dinks, and send third chops flying past the baseline. A power-first mindset leads to inconsistency. Focus on control. Power can come later once your mechanics and timing are dialed in. Spin is next. Spin looks flashy and the marketing around it can be very persuasive, but without the ability to place your shots or control depth, all the spin in the world just makes your arrows more dramatic. Don't get distracted by textured faces or RPM numbers if you're still figuring out your contact point. Spin helps when you already have control, not before. Another common mistake is copying what the pros use. It makes sense. Ben John plays with a certain paddle, so it must be the best, right? Not necessarily. Pros aren't just better players, they're also using modified paddles. They add tungsten, change balance, tweak handle shapes. So even if you bought the same model, you're not getting the same setup. And unless your technique is just as clean, it won't perform the same way in your hands. And then there's following your friend's lead. It's a social game and most of us borrow gear at some point, but what feels great for their swing, strength, and background might feel totally wrong for you. Try their paddle, sure, but buy based on what works for you, not what works for them. Finally, beginners often go too light or too heavy. A super light paddle might feel quick at first, but it can lead to instability and far less control. A heavy one might offer power, but if the swing weight is too high, it'll wear out your arm and slow you down at the net. That's why I keep coming back to the same guideline. A swing weight between 105 to 115, a twist weight of 6.5 or higher, and a static weight of 7.8 to 8.1 ounces. That range gives you control, forgiveness, and long-term comfort. Okay, so let's bring all this together. Picking the right paddle isn't about chasing power, copying pros, or grabbing whatever looks good on Amazon or on the shelf at Dick's Sporting Goods. It's about giving yourself the best chance to improve quickly and enjoy the game while you do it. Start with control. You need a paddle that helps you keep the ball in play and not one that punishes every mistake. Materials matter too, but not in the way most marketing suggests. You don't need fancy tech. You need a paddle that gives you dwell time, reliable feedback, and a predictable response. That's what builds consistency. And if you're unsure what feels right, try to demo a few before buying. Feel always beats theory. The truth is, no paddle will magically fix your game, but the wrong one can absolutely make it harder to improve. So don't fall for hype, skip the gimmicks, and don't assume more expensive means better. If you want specific paddle suggestions that fit the recommendations we just covered, check the description. I've linked options I've tested and actually stand behind, along with tools that help you filter based on what you need. And if this guide helped you, I'd love it if you'd subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, or share it with someone just starting out. The more players we help get started with the right gear, the stronger the game becomes. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.